Hello, this is our replication project for the Advanced Applied Behavior Analysis course, Section 810 for summer 2019. The participants are Kristen, Sajin, Kimberly, and Allison. We decided to do a replication for the following study, Decreasing Bouts of Prolonged Sitting Among Office Workers by Green, Sigurdson, and Wilder. We chose this study because we are all in the ABA field and sit frequently throughout the course of our day. We also know the importance of staying active in an office environment as it provides many health benefits, which I will go into more depth in the literature review. For our literature review, we found 5 studies that meet the criteria mentioned. All of these studies address similar issues as our current study and discuss the risk of sedentary behavior. The risks mentioned in these studies are diabetes, cardiovascular disease, all-cause mortality, cancer, obesity, metabolic syndrome, and other chronic diseases. These will be referenced in our specific study discussion. For our first study, completed by Wilmot et al. In 2012, this study was a systematic review and meta-analysis of 18 studies from across the world. This study specifically mentioned that sedentary time is associated with an increased risk of diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cardiovascular and all-cause mortality. The authors noted that previous studies showed the average adult spends 50 to 60% of their day engaged in sedentary behavior. The overall conclusion from this study is that reducing sedentary time may have a significant role in diabetes prevention. Some recommendations from this study are that more research is done on adults and sedentary behavior. Future diabetes programs should promote reduced sedentary behavior, and more research is needed for the correlation between sedentary time and metabolic health. For our second study, completed by Vander Ploeg, Che, Korda, Banks, and Bowman in 2012, this study evaluated the relationship between sitting and all-cause mortality. This study noted that high volumes of sitting time have possible associations with an increased risk of obesity, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and cancer. And this study utilized self-report questionnaires from 222,497 adults aged 45 and up in New South Wales, Australia, and a follow-up average of 2.8 years, during which 5,405 deaths were reported from the same group. The study suggested that increased sitting accounted for 6.9% of deaths from that original group. Some recommendations from this study are that public health programs should focus on decreased sitting times, as well as increasing physical activities, and encouraging high-risk groups, such as those with cardiovascular disease, diabetes, or overweight or obese, to sit less and be more physically active should be a public health priority. For our third study, completed by Thosar, Belko, Mather, Johnson, and Wallace in 2015, this study noted that increased sitting time has been associated with chronic diseases and an increased risk of mortality. There were 12 participants used for this study, and all participants were healthy, inactive young men. And the authors concluded that breaking sitting time protects endothelial function, which is a potential predictor of future stroke or cardiovascular issues. Recommendations from this study are there should be structured public health guidelines on limiting sitting time, and to increase studies of inactivity, specifically sitting time and health risk correlation. For our next study, Study 4, completed by Van Danzig, Galinci, and Van Halteren in 2013, this study noted that sedentary behavior is associated with metabolic syndrome, which has a higher risk of developing cardiovascular disease and diabetes. And the authors recognized that the risk of sedentary behavior is independent of one's overall physical activity level, and a person can meet recommended daily guidelines of overall physical activity and still have a sedentary lifestyle the remainder of the day. The authors point out that taking frequent breaks from sitting is associated with a healthier metabolism. This study used 2 experiments, one using a mobile app that prompted users to take regular active breaks, and one that used computer-assisted technology to send messages to users when they had been working at their computer for longer than 30 minutes. There were 8 participants in the first study and 86 in the second study. Both studies took place in the Netherlands. Some recommendations from this study are that more effective mobile applications that motivate people to take regular breaks from sitting are needed. Monitoring sedentary behavior at an organizational level could decrease sedentary behavior at an individual level without being too intrusive. And increased awareness of the harmfulness of sedentary behavior is needed. For our 5th study, completed by Martin et al. In 2017, this study noted that time spent inactive and sedentary are both associated with poor health. High levels of total sedentary time are associated with increased risk of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and all-cause mortality. This study concluded that self-monitoring of walking is effective at increasing physical activity. The study had 40 participants, all of whom were sedentary men in Europe. And the recommendations from this study are to continue the correlation between the use of real-time self-monitoring devices and increasing physical activity, and use self-monitoring devices to decrease sedentary behavior and increase the number of steps taken. Next, Sajin will provide an in-depth look at the study for replication.
Thank you. So the purpose of this study is to replicate the procedures of the original study entitled Decreasing Bouts of Prolonged Sitting Among Office Workers, which evaluates the effect of 3 behavioral interventions to reduce prolonged sitting among office workers. So methods of our current project or our current study and the original study. So in the original study, participants were 3 female office workers. They worked in a private university in the southeastern part of the US, and their age ranged between 20 and 59 years old. All participants worked full-time, seated at a desk. Work included completing computer work, answering phone calls, and attending meetings. In our replication study, participants were 4 female graduate students, 1 African American, and 3 Caucasian. The age range was 29 years old to 47 years old. All participants implement direct intervention strategies. They complete clerical work and attend meetings. And all participants were of moderate to good health and were able to walk without assistance. So for the settings, in the original study, they used their work environment, and the settings were Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. In our replication studies, due to some limitations of location among participants, we chose to do any environment in a 10-hour time frame for 8 consecutive hours in the participants' respective time zones, because one participant was in the Pacific time zone and the other 3 participants were in the Central time zone, which will be talked about further in the limitations section. Also, the study was conducted from Monday through Friday. In our materials section, in the original study, the materials used were an Actigraph GT3X Plus unit, which was an accelerometer to record physical activity. They then used an ActiLife 6, which was a data analysis program used with the Actigraph unit. They used a WatchMinder 3 program, which delivered the tactile prompts, a USB cable to transfer the data, and email, to which they used for feedback and goal setting. In our replication study, due to our limitations, we used a Fitbit and Google Fit app because one participant had an Android device and the other 3 had an iPhone, so there was a compatibility issue. We also used Stand Up, the work break timer app, which was what we used for our tactile prompt. Our smartphones, like I mentioned before, there were iPhones and Android devices. We used the internet, email for our feedback and inter-observer agreement, and as well as our treatment integrity, and goal setting. And we also use messaging service for our phone carriers. So next, our behavior. So the independent variable was 2 behavior intervention components, which comprised of the tactile prompt phase and the tactile prompt feedback and goal setting phase. Our dependent variable was the number of bouts of prolonged sitting that were greater than 30 minutes per workday. And our definition was sedentary behaviors can be defined as any instance of taking less than 100 steps in a 30+ minute period. Data will be collected by making frequency of behavior via the Fitbit and Google Fit app tracking system, where 1 count of sedentary behavior equals a period of 30 minutes of 0 to 99 steps. Next, we'll go into the data collection portion of the method of the project.
Participants had a 10-hour time frame in which they chose an 8 consecutive hour block to collect data in their respective time zones. Count steps were translated into bouts of sedentary behavior, which was defined as less than 100 steps per 30+ minute periods. Screenshots were taken of each 30-minute time frame as broken down by the Fitbit or Google Fit apps, and then were sent to participants' research partners daily for permanent product data. We have included 2 pictures of our screenshots of data collection on our slide, one from the Android on the top and one from the iPhones on the bottom. The design method used in our replication was the same as the one used in the original study. We used a single subject research design, and specifically the concurrent multiple baseline across participants. During baseline, data was collected Monday through Friday during a consecutive 8-hour period in participants' respective time zones. Baseline started for all participants on the same day. Screenshots of session data collection were sent to individual research partners for data analysis. Research partners advised participants when they had achieved stability and were able to move out of the baseline phase. Stabilization was defined as close a number of bouts of 3 consecutive sessions without an increasing or decreasing trend. This information was shared with other participants so they knew when they could move out of the baseline phase, having to achieve stability first on their own and wait for the participant ahead of them, if there was one, to have at least 3 data points in intervention with their stability or a decreasing trend established, as that was the goal of the intervention. In the tactile prompt phase, data collection was continued Monday through Friday for a consecutive 8-hour period. Use of the Fitbit and Google Fit apps was continued for their pedometer features. The Stand Up, the work break timer app, was added as a tactile prompt. It was set to send an alert every 30 minutes, at which time participants checked to see if they had reached 99 steps. And if they hadn't, then they moved. Screenshots of session data collection were sent to research partners daily for data analysis. Research partners again advised when stability was achieved in order to move out of the tactile prompt phase, and for other participants to know when they could enter the tactile prompt phase, having to again wait for the person ahead of them, if there was one, to have 3 data points with either stability or a decreasing trend. Stabilization criteria was the same as what was listed in the baseline phase. The tactile prompt feedback and goal setting phase. Again, data collection was continued Monday through Friday for a consecutive 8-hour period. Use of the Fitbit and Google Fit apps was continued for their pedometer features. The Stand Up, the Work Break Timer app was continued to be used for its tactile prompt feature as well, with the same 30-minute settings. In addition, feedback was provided daily by research partners on the bouts of sedentary behavior noted for participants, and a goal was set for the following session. If the goal was not met the next session, then the research partner would encourage the participant to achieve 50% of the goal set for the previous session. Goal setting was not shared with other participants. Stability and trend data was provided to other participants to allow monitoring of when they could move into the tactile prompt feedback and goal setting phase based on 3 data points with decreasing trend or stability by the participant ahead of them, if there was one. For inter-observer agreement, total count IOA was conducted with research partners once every phase. Self-reported total counts of bouts of sedentary behavior were exchanged via email on the chosen day. Total count IOA equals the smaller count divided by the larger count multiplied by 100 to give the total count IOA percentage. Treatment integrity and fidelity. Participants emailed their research partners once every 5 sessions. That was a 20% portion of the 5-session data collection period, and asked them, are you keeping your phone on you during the entire data collection period? And is your pedometer and tactile prompt, if in phase were included, were working correctly? Participants replied with a yes or no answer. Next, Allison will discuss results.
All right, so we are looking at the results for Kimberly. This is her table. Kimberly remained in baseline throughout the duration of our study. Her baseline mean was 5.13, and her baseline range was 2 to 7. Now we will see her graph. So you can see she had a little bit of an upward trend in the middle of the collection period, and it went down during session 7 and then up again on session 8. However, she was still in baseline. We can move on to Kristen right now. This is her table. Kristen also remained in baseline for the duration of the study. She had a baseline mean of 3.15 and a baseline range of 1 through 5, I'm sorry. Now we will see her graph. So Kristen's bouts were pretty unstable in the beginning. She had a slight upward trend from session 4 to session 7, and then again a little bit of a downward trend for session 8. Our next participant was Sajin, and she was the only participant to fully move into the first phase of our intervention, which was the tactile prompt phase. So her baseline mean was 9, her baseline range was 7 to 10, her tactile prompt mean was 7.5, and her tactile prompt range was 5 through 11. And now we can see her graph. So her baseline was on a downward trend until the 3rd session, and with a slight upward trend on the 4th session. Her spike in sedentary bouts was pretty high on the 7th session, as it was across all participants, and that was due to a holiday, which contributed to unusual activity among all 4 women. And then on the 8th, she went down in sedentary behavior. Our next participant was Allison. Allison remained in baseline for most of the study. However, there was a point during the 7th session when she had mistakenly moved into the first phase of intervention due to miscommunication. So she was immediately sent back to baseline the following day. Her baseline mean was 2.5. Her baseline range was 0 to 5. The tactile prompt mean was 8, and the tactile prompt range was 8. And then her baseline mean for returning to baseline was 6, and then her baseline range upon returning to baseline was also 6. And so you can see now on her graph, she had a pretty unstable baseline, an increase on the 7th due to the holiday, and then a return to baseline on the 8th session. So now you can see our combined graphs and the stagger line drawn through all 4 participant graphs. Now for the conclusion. So the conclusion from the original study show an increase in activity levels among all participants, with the combination of the intervention package was the tactile prompt phase, feedback, and goal. During intervention, the mean duration of bouts of inactivity decreased among participants, and all participants were motivated to increase their physical activity by use of prompts during the study. So now the conclusion for the replication. So all participants were unable to move into both the feedback and goal setting phases of the intervention package due to time constraints for the class. All 3 participants remained in baseline except for 1 participant who was able to move into the first tactile prompt phase, which was Sajin. And then during her bouts of sitting, she showed an overall decrease in activity levels due to the tactile prompt. And so now I will discuss our limitations. So for the limitations of the study, as was mentioned in the beginning, all 3 participants had office jobs in the original study and were sitting most of the days. Our limitations to our study was that we had varying activity level job descriptions, which changed our activity levels, which also is included as a modification. So we changed our working definition of from any work environment to any environment we found ourselves in. We were also located in different time zones, with 1 participant in Pacific time zone and the rest in Central. This contributed to moments of miscommunication, which altered 1 participant to move into intervention prematurely. And due to time constraints of the class, all participants were not able to receive the full components of the treatment package. And finally, all participants had unusual activity levels due to a holiday during the weekday data collection period. So now we want to open the floor up to questions you may have or comments. We'd love to hear your feedback for our project, as we've enjoyed viewing yours as well. Now you can see our references.